Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, joined by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleagues, Ben Goessling and Andrew Krammer. You guys, we've been out in the sun, the very hot sun, for about a week now, watching training camp, and they progressed through that acclimation period last week. We finally saw the pads come on yesterday, and you know what? I think it's been a pretty exciting training camp. There's a lot of stuff for us to catch everyone up on today, and so I just want to start with kind of what's everyone's broad takeaway through these first 5 practices. We're going into our 6th practice that we'll watch today. Ben, let's start with you.
Well, I think the front 7 has probably been the big one. And certainly yesterday, first day in pads, I think that was the big takeaway, just how diverse that pass rush can be with Dallas Turner looking like he's going to maybe get a bigger role alongside Van Ginkel and Grenard. You add those tackles to it. I mean, the pass rush was very disruptive in that first day of pads yesterday. And I think, we'll see that continue as we go. I'm curious to see how they use Dallas Turner. I'm curious to see how they kind of go about the course of the season with all of those things. And I think that's the group that caught my eye, at least the first day of pads, which is really kind of the first day of things you can pay more attention to.
Andrew, what about you? What's your biggest takeaway through this first week?
Yeah, I agree with Ben. I think all of us media, when we were sitting there just watching, did Grenard get after it? The first pass rush rep was between Van Ginkel and O'Neal, and that one was a great rep and a great matchup to watch throughout. And the interior, I talked to O'Neal afterward. He mentioned Jonathan Allen's got moves that, frankly, none of our defensive tackles I've played with before have done. And he's mentioning the hump pass rush move that Reggie White made famous way back in the 90s and all that, and saying that this guy does it better than anybody that I've seen. And so, and O'Neal went as far as to say, this is, as far as dudes, he said, as far as just dudes and talent, he means this is probably the best defensive line I've seen us face so far in camp. So I think, yeah, that's the storyline. And then, Ben, you're working on this story as well. But the flip side of it is, how does J.J. McCarthy develop against the chaos, not just the talent, but the schematics that Brian Flores throws at you, and how do you try to structure things? And I'm sure you can talk a lot more about that, but that's also a major storyline in seeing how he develops. But to me, along those lines, I guess it's the offensive line. It's the fact that Will Fries got team reps, the guy who signed the 5-year, $88 million deal, coming off the broken leg. He was good enough to progress and get into some 11-on-11 action right out of the gate. And then O'Neal had mentioned to me yesterday that Christian Darrisaw will progress to that point by the end of this week. So they should have their entire offensive line together by at least Friday. And so that's a good sign for McCarthy and for this offense in general.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like yesterday, finally, with seeing the trenches in action, we really saw kind of like the trickle effects that these moves on both sides of the lines that they made in the offseason have on the rest of this team. So like on that defensive side, right, we've seen so many more formations that Brian Flores can go through, so many different mixes of players, both up front and in the secondary, because he has more depth there at that interior spot. And then on the offensive side, I mean, Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason, we can talk about Jordan Mason later on, because I mean, he's just been impressive to watch even when he's not hitting people. I'm sure it's going to be even more fun when you do really get to hear those pads pop. But yes, let's talk about JJ for a second, because I don't think we can do a podcast about training camp and not mention JJ at all. I think we'd have some very upset listeners in our comment section.
Might be mad too.
Yes. Ben, Andrew brought up what you asked Brian Flores about yesterday, and kind of that balance of how does Brian get to test his defense and continue to push his defense, which is a very veteran side of the ball right now. I'd probably say leans slightly more veteran than the offensive side, but still lets JJ get some reps in, get the testing in that he needs to feel confident entering this season.
Yeah, this has been kind of an ongoing thing over the last couple of years, Emily. I can think back to, I had this conversation with O'Connell last December when I was working on a story about Flores before the playoffs. And he said one of the things they do, he calls them dealer's choice periods, where basically there'll be stretches of practice where one of them can say, hey, I just need kind of base looks here. I need stuff that I can install a play, or I want to see a certain look because I think this will be something a team does. That's not something you're talking about in training camp as much as it is during the regular season, but they have sort of developed this way of saying, how can we at least install some portion of practice where I can get things that are going to be helpful for my offense rather than you pulling out every item in your bag of tricks. And that would be the same thing for Flores to be able to say to O'Connell, hey, I don't need every motion. I don't need every, wrinkle that you put in your scheme here. I just need something that's going to look more like what we might see from this team, or I just need a clean look to install something against. So that's been something they've used to get through that. And Flores said yesterday, it's kind of an ongoing conversation about how you do that. But I think for his part, J.J. McCarthy, I think when we asked him about this last week, he said, there's no shortage of ways that you can get better against this defense. And, for a 22-year-old, he seems to have the growth mindset thing down pretty well. So he doesn't seem like he's backing away from the challenge of facing this particular defense. Doesn't seem like he wants to have things dialed back too much. He doesn't want to be playing from the white tees that way, put it that way. He wants to be, back further playing from the tips. It seems more often than not.
We should note too that I don't know if this entirely speaks to what you were talking about there with the different periods that they have for strength and stuff. Yeah. But we do see a lot of the first team offense versus the second team defense or the third team defense, and then vice versa, the first team defense against second, third string offense. So I think there's a little bit of that energy and messaging mixed in there too of, okay, let's let our first team defense go full speed, but we're going to do it against the second team offense or whatever.
They've used some of those reps, I think, to, for the benefit of the second team, saying, let's evaluate you against starters, because if you have to play, it's going to be against starters. So I think sometimes it's for those things too, but yes, it is. There are a number of purposes there that they can kind of mix and match with, and it can be beneficial, I think, for a number of different people. And we saw at the end yesterday, that 2-minute drill, they went ones versus ones, and that was probably the most exciting thing we saw. I mean, a number of things yesterday, but that one especially, and that's where you kind of saw the defense make its point about why it's a difficult group to practice against, because they definitely controlled that stretch of things when it was ones versus ones.
Well, and now JJ's not getting to throw to Justin Jefferson, the other JJ. Right. We keep throwing Emily off with that, because all of us who were here before last year called Justin Jefferson JJ, and she's like, no, there's one JJ. But Ben, we saw Jefferson running around and kind of jogging at times. It didn't seem that this injury was any more major than they've let on, at least at this point.
Yeah, it will be interesting to hear how they talk about it. I imagine they'll continue to be cautious, but to the point of practicing with J.J. McCarthy, I think that's worth keeping in mind, because it is a different thing with Justin Jefferson and how everybody covers him. And you see them do some of those things in practice. The Vikings defense does some of those things to give the offense a better sense of, if he's getting doubled or there's a safety shaded to his side all the time, what's that going to mean for the rest of the coverage? What's that going to mean for trying to get the ball to him in some of those situations? So I think the time that the two of them are missing on the field, when they still haven't had all that much in the grand scheme of things, that's probably the biggest effect of this, and we'll see how quickly they get him back on the field. I can't imagine they're going to rush it, especially when it's his second hamstring and he's had him in both legs at this point. But yeah, the time, however quickly they can get him back with J.J. McCarthy, it's not worth jeopardizing his health, but I do think that's the biggest factor here in terms of when you get him back on the field, is just how much more time can you preserve for him and really the two of them to work together.
Yeah. And I was going to add, for listeners who might have missed it, Kevin O'Connell had just said that it's not a concern that Jefferson's availability is not in jeopardy for week one. But obviously, Ben, with what you just said, we all know that time together is invaluable, so invaluable that they spent it at Woodbury High School together, getting workouts in July before even showing up here. So O'Connell said disappointing is not the right word, but it's easy, I should say, to argue that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that I do feel like, obviously Jefferson's absence right now is a big thing, but I do feel like you've really been able to see that the work that JJ put in with some of the other receiving targets over this summer. Like, he's had great connections with Jordan Addison so far through training camp, kind of all over the field too. TJ Hawkinson has been the one that's really stood out to me. And I don't know how much of that is also like TJ just feeling more himself now that he's kind of closer to a year removed from his return from his knee injury. But like, you can tell that those guys were down in Tennessee going through that. Josh Oliver had a couple catches yesterday that were really impressive and stood out. So that work, like, you can see that work manifesting in training camp and paying off in training camp. And so we'll see, like, I guess how another 4 weeks of doing it with the team and in padded practices kind of build on that. we've touched a little bit on the trenches here and Will Fries, but Andrew, what have we kind of seen from both Fries and Darrisaw in terms of their participation, knowing that last week we entered training camp with the understanding that they were both going to kind of be limited here for the opening days, week or two, with the injuries that they're coming off of?
Yeah, this is tracked exactly the same way Kevin O'Connell said it would at the start of training camp when he said Will Fries is nearing his return, has been fully cleared. We're just wanting to slowly ramp him up in this acclimation period. And as soon as that's done, on Monday, he's out there right away with the padded practices. And I didn't see him get too limited. He was pulled out, I think, for the second and third groupings of their 11-on-11 when the first team went out there. So he only got maybe one full first team drill in with him, but that's probably going to increase as the days go on and as they have their very regimented plans for these guys. It's noteworthy that Fries mentioned that he had another cleanup or operation. He would not clarify exactly what it was, but something since he signed with the Vikings, something had popped up with that broken leg that he suffered last fall. And so he said that he's fine. He looks fine, which is great news for the Vikings, and that is behind him at this point. Although he did clarify that he'll have to continue rehabbing this after practices moving forward for the time being. But with Darrisaw, that's also great news. And I overheard an assistant coach telling Darrisaw yesterday on the field, like, when are you going to be ready? You look like you're ready right now. And so these guys are happy about where he's at. That's echoing the chorus of stuff that we've heard since May when O'Connell talked about how far ahead Christian Darrisaw was. So it's just great news that this group is coming together, because if Jefferson can't be on the field much this training camp, or at least right now, it's going to be incredibly beneficial for the offensive line, not just for McCarthy, but as you guys talked about, Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, just this whole running game that needs to coalesce and come together and be a lot better than it's been in previous years.
Ben, you were in a scrum with Ryan Kelly the other day.
Yeah.
I know. What did he kind of have to say about this O-line, McCarthy, kind of all of it since he's gotten here?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. In full disclosure, a lot of that was about some of the union stuff. He's on the executive committee with the NFLPA. So we talked quite a bit about all of the changes at the NFLPA. He had some strong things that he wanted to say in defense of J.C. Treader. So a lot of the conversation was there, but I did get a chance to ask him a little bit about J.J. McCarthy. And you can add Phillip Rivers and Andrew Luck to Josh Allen in the list of accomplished quarterbacks that J.J. McCarthy's veteran teammates have compared him to. Ryan Kelly brought up both of those guys just in terms of their understanding of how to lead a team. And that's something you hear about J.J. a lot, and it's certainly something that you hear Kevin O'Connell emphasize with quarterbacks a lot. He's talked about how a quarterback changes the basically the vibe of the entire building. When you have a guy that is the leader, that everybody knows is the leader, those types of guys change buildings. They change the energy in the whole place. So that is very much, I mean, that when he takes him out to lunch to see how he interacts with the people in Ann Arbor when they're on that visit at Michigan, I mean, all of those things are to get at that part of a guy's personality and his makeup. And it certainly seems like there's a lot of veteran players who have been around high-level quarterbacks that see some similarities there. It doesn't mean that he's going to have it all figured out week one, but that was kind of one of the big takeaways from Ryan Kelly saying that, was just that this is not a guy who anybody seems terribly worried about being the voice in the huddle and kind of the voice in that locker room at age 22.
Yeah, I had asked Aaron Jones about like how he would describe JJ's leadership at the close to the end of last week. And, you know, he was like, he's straight to the point. He means all business, but he's also knows how to relate to everyone on the team, which I think we have really seen like just come up. Like, obviously we can't always hear what's going on on the practice field, but you see it in the way he's like high-fiving guys. He's going over to receivers to watch footage with them on the video boards after reps are done. He's given Sam Howell a pat on the back after his reps are done. All of that stuff, like you see it in his mannerisms that he is putting an effort in, like no matter like how natural it is for him, it certainly seems natural, but he's also making that effort as well to go up and get all these guys and make sure they know that he has their back.
Yeah, and this is Sam's first go-around in this offense. JJ's at least been here a year, but it was interesting, Emily. I'm glad you brought that up. Yesterday we noticed, I think it seemed like a bad throw from Sam Howell. We're not in the huddle, obviously, but it seemed like a bad throw, and Howell turns around and McCarthy is like the first one there to kind of greet him and kind of pat him on the back, get his shoulders up or head up. And it's just interesting to see this guy, no matter who it is. Ryan Kelly was talking yesterday as well about his command in the huddle. And he said, look, the routes and the depths and what he needs to do will all come, but I want to see how he is. And Ben, I'm sure he said the same stuff to you guys about, I just want to see how he commands that huddle. And for a young guy, it doesn't matter if you're 22 or 42, it's important. And this kid's got it. So it was just interesting to hear that from all these guys.
I'll throw out a question to everyone. Who has surprised you most at training camp? Whether it be someone you completely weren't expecting to see participate as much as they are, make as much of an impact, someone that you knew was going to make an impact and still has impressed you. Like, who's surprised you most?
I mean, I guess the first name that comes to mind for me, it's a little bit of a, the opportunity has come to him because of Justin Jefferson, but Lucky Jackson, I think,
that was going to be mine.
Yeah, I mean, he's gotten a lot of time with the ones and has looked like a guy that can contribute there. He's not seeing all of the top corners with Isaiah Rodgers not practicing much, but the time that he's gotten with the ones and the plays he's made when he's been in there, I think have been noteworthy. Had another nice catch, I think yesterday, and he's just looks like he's played the position. He's been in this offense for a while now, so he's got a little more command of the route tree, command of what they want. But yeah, he has been impressive to me. And Jordan Addison, you mentioned him. That's probably not one that is a surprise from the standpoint of he's unexpected. But I would throw a half mention to him as well. Just to, not a guy that probably fits this classification quite the same way, but he's looked awfully good, especially on some of those route adjustments on deep balls.
I haven't seen necessarily a ton of things, just myself observing the short camp that we've had, but Jeff Okudah continues to get these reps as the third corner, and this can age very quickly because they'll bring in Stephon Gilmore in late August and things change, obviously. But Brian Flores was really complimentary yesterday, talking about Jeff Okudah and how he's been since he got him. And since I've got him, he's been great in the building, great in the locker room, great on the field and all this stuff. And it doesn't sound like a coach who's ready to give up on this guy the way that the NFL seemingly has before, because he played just 6 games for the Houston Texans last year. He's been really banged up throughout his career. He's on his 4th different team in 4 years, yet with the Vikings, it's been this unquestioned role, at least so far, and by July 29th, where he's been that third corner over Mekhi Blackman, over Dwight McGlothern, who's been buried with the second team. Zamiah Vaughn, the undrafted rookie corner, has been getting reps even above those aforementioned two, and Blackman and McGlothern. So Okudah seems to be the guy that they're giving this long runway to take this job. And I haven't seen a ton of pass breakups. We saw McGlothern have an interception yesterday off of, I think, Max Brosmer. But if he keeps at least getting put in these positions, Okudah could start showing the Vikings that he was worthy of it, because at least Flores at this point thinks he is.
Lucky Jackson was going to be my pick. I'll throw out, I've been surprised to see how much Kobe King, the late round draft pick from this year, has been involved in some of the linebacking stuff. They seem to really like him. I know we talked with them in the spring about he's like a very cerebral player. He was the guy who had coach's voice in his helmet during his college years at Penn State, which is obviously a pretty big deal, a pretty big responsibility. So he's been on the field, I feel like, a lot. Less surprised because we haven't actually been able to see too much, but someone who might intrigue has definitely tipped up on is Australian punter Oscar Chapman. And I think our colleague Mark Craig is writing about him later this week, but it sounds like there might be something more going on there in terms of, is this actually a competition, or does Ryan Wright just have the job? That's kind of been floating around, I think, a little bit. So I'm hoping we get to see more punting reps. We got 1 or 2 yesterday that we got to see, but I'm curious.
I think we saw the watermelon ball too that Matt Daniels kept talking about. Was it last year or 2 years ago? We did a whole press conference.
It was last year.
The onside kick.
Yeah. I think we saw that as well. And then there was other. I'm mixing it up, but there was some punt that Oscar did that looked like it should not have been spinning the way it was, but it was on purpose because these guys have just incredible ways to make it difficult to catch. But yeah, he was booting the heck out of the ball. And I think Mark Craig had said Matt Daniels had made mention to him, no, this is not just an international guy that we're just bringing along. We want to see what this kid can do.
The watermelon ball.
Ryan Wright, just quickly, I don't know that Ryan Wright has done enough over the last couple of years where you'd say, punting competition, what are they doing? I mean, I think they brought in people before. I think that's a reasonable expectation that this is not a job that's completely locked up.
Yeah, well, and I will note too that like because he's an international pathways player, like they're allowed to keep him on the roster. Like he has his own designated practice spot. Like if he does not make the 53 man, they can keep him on the practice squad and keep him around, and that competition can be drawn out until maybe midway through the year they decide, hey, we need to mix things up here, and we have Oscar and we can bring him up. So that will certainly, it feels like, extend beyond just this 4-week period. The watermelon ball press conference with Matt Daniels, I want to say that was like my first or second coordinator day. And like the coordinator days were what I was writing about last fall. And I was like, is this what the coordinator days are always like? Just talking about this really intricate punting? Like,
I think that one was it at the Bears had done it?
I think so.
Yeah. Yep.
At Soldier Field, I think, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was we spent a good 15-20 minutes on that.
That's obviously, as you know by now, it's obviously not very common. We haven't heard much from, I mean, we'll talk to Matt Daniels, I think, later this week, but we have not heard much from him to kind of break this whole thing down yet. So the punting thing, the other question is holding. I mean, do you want to change holders? I think would be the only other question with, it not being Ryan Wright. That's, I know something they would think about in terms of the field goal operation. And would you default to Ryan Wright to maintain that continuity with your holder if it's close? So probably the only other thing to think about there.
One question I want to pose to you guys before we break here, Ben, there's been a lot of Jordan Mason, right? Much Jordan Mason in camp. It seems like he's starting off 11-on-11 periods. How much of this do you think is just getting a new guy ready? Because Aaron obviously knows what he's doing versus this could be like a legitimate 50-50 split.
I think it's more the latter. I do think they're going to use him a lot. And I think the contract he got, I mean, Aaron Jones obviously is making a fair amount of money too, but they gave Jordan Mason a contract that would suggest he's not just going to be an alternative getting 8 carries a game. I do think he's going to play a bigger role. I think there's going to be a lot of goal to go situations, third down situations, third down running situations, probably more than passing situations. I think Aaron Jones is still a third down back in that setting, but no, I do think he's going to be a significant part of this offense. So, the fact that he's been in there as much as he has, I'm sure they're trying to get him caught up to speed because he doesn't have the time in this system that Aaron Jones does. But no, I buy the idea that he's going to play a fair amount. So, fantasy people, as you're listening to this, scouring for tidbits, there's one for you. I would keep an eye on Jordan Mason.
Yeah, and Emily, Ben, we both heard, I think we were all there with Wes Phillips when he was talking about how this guy can pass protect. Like he wasn't necessarily asked to in San Francisco. And when you look at their system, Kyle Juszczyk, they use the fullback a lot to do those kinds of things. McCaffrey doesn't really pass protect either because he's so good. So how much of that can he do is going to be a big question. How much of that do they want him to do if this offensive line is that much better this year? It's going to be a fascinating, I think, split and really to see how it develops throughout the season, because we see year after year they have plans to get guys into roles and then it falls apart because Aaron Jones is that much better or Dalvin Cook is many years ago or whatever. So that'll be a storyline to keep an eye on. I
think the difference here is that you have a guy that has a little more of an accomplished track record in the NFL than your Ty Chandlers or even Alexander Madison when he was first coming in. I think there's a little bit of a difference in terms of this is a guy who's already shown with another team he can do it, and they make an effort to bring him in knowing that's already part of it. It's not so much a projection at this point. It's a guy that's produced for a team that runs a similar offense to what the Vikings do and uses personnel in a way that I think they find appealing and want to mimic in some ways. So I think that maybe is where this situation is a little different than the ones we've seen in the past. They have not really had a timeshare of, for as much as we've talked about the NFL shifting to that. I mean, the post Adrian years that Andrew, you and I have covered all of, they've talked about this in the past and it hasn't happened. It's been Dalvin Cook getting most of the carries. It was Alexander Madison. That's probably the year that was the most different. In some ways that was just because it didn't work out. and they wanted him to be the one. It just didn't work out. But then Aaron Jones gets most of them last year. So, yeah, it could be a different horse this year, so to speak.
And the closest we got was 2017, right? Latavius Murray and McKinnon, but that's only in part because Dalvin got hurt his rookie year. Right?
Yep, tore his ACL. But yes, you're right. They had those two guys that were involved a lot. But yeah, in terms of like them having their druthers with how things went the way they wanted to, we have not seen them intentionally do it. It's been still more of the kind of traditional running back that gets most of the workload, the ones that fantasy players like, because you know that that's going to be the guy on the field. This one, the Vikings could be that team this year that the fantasy owners are saying, I just wish I knew which one of these two guys was going to get the workload. And this will be the year where all of the people are tweeting at us, hey, just wanted to check and see what you think Jordan Mason, and you look at the Twitter handle, it always has DFS in there. So we'll get a lot on these two guys this year, I'll bet.
Well, we're headed back out to practice this afternoon. Training camp chugs on. It feels like the first preseason game is rapidly approaching somehow already, which is crazy to think about. But be sure to follow along with all of our work on thestartribune.com and then also on the Star Tribune's YouTube page. We've been trying out some different things there, doing some shorter form videos just to do some quick hit updates for you guys. And then also on the Strib Sports Instagram page, where we are telling you what to watch for every day that fans are allowed out at practice. Those have been fun for us to make, fun for me to get to flex my tech skills on these two as they record their videos. But we will be back with you guys again soon.